The first thing to say is that with respect to these drugs that are commonly used, and I'm talking about alcohol and tobacco and also cannabis these days, they all carry adverse effects. There are differences in the level of adverse effects. You can argue about it, but all of them have important consequences for public health and also for welfare. They affect not only the user, but also people other than the user. And so they're not ordinary substances, and they should be subject to specific and special rules as commodities, essentially, around purchasing and using them. And that's one of the points. For cannabis, the alcohol experience teaches us that it's really important what you put in effect at the point where you stop prohibition, because it's never going to get stronger than that, the control structure that you have, because you've got all of these interests within the system that will be pushing for it, in fact, to be made more available. For both alcohol and cannabis, it's really important to have a structure that is limiting availability, essentially. That is not making it that easy to get hold of the substance, or large quantities of the substance particularly. That can be around the times that it's available for sale. It can be around the number of places that are selling. It can be around it can be days of the week as well as times. It can be around the price, the taxes on it.
Have you found that kind of making it cost prohibitive? Do you find that hasn't found that works at all?
Well, I'm not arguing for it being prohibitive. I'm arguing for it being a mild discouragement, essentially. And if you look at the price of cheap wine or cheap cider these days in Australia, it's often cheaper than the bottled water. Essentially, it's not a discouragement. The question is, from a public health point of view, these are commodities that carry lots of risks, but clearly are in demand, and clearly we've learned from experience that forbidding them is not, has its own problems as a solution. So the question is how you can make it available to people in a way that you're not making life too difficult for them, but on the other hand, you're gently discouraging, essentially. And and for alcohol, we've moved too far in Australia towards routinizing it into a regular commodity, just putting it on the grocery shelves with everything else, and we need to re-examine that. And then with respect to the international level, the international treaties on trade are becoming a substantial impediment to governments doing that with these commodities, because they tend to treat alcohol and tobacco as ordinary commodities in the trade treaties. And so there are various measures we can think about that would be dealing with that, but it's a substantial issue. What we have in Australia is a system that grew like Topsy. It's different in each state, which is fine. It's very varied. It's not very well coordinated, and in particular it isn't very well linked either with the regular health system or with the mental health system. So we need to be thinking seriously about how we can move in that direction, while at the same time preserving choice for people who find themselves in trouble, or families that find themselves with someone in trouble with alcohol or drugs, or for that matter tobacco. And the problem is, everyone wants linkage and coordinating it, and that's something that everyone is always talking about, though not doing so much about. But from the point of view of someone who's really down and out and in trouble with alcohol, for instance, having some choices is kind of important to their life, and you don't want to destroy the idea that there's more than one door that they could be going in,
So that's choice in terms of treatment?
Yeah, for instance, treatment or other resources, so you want to do these two things at once. On the one hand, you want to make it better coordinated and hopefully less stigmatized as a system. And but on the other hand, you want to be sure to do that in such a way that you don't end up with only one door that someone can go through. The other thing that's relevant to that, I think, is that Australia is really weak on studies of treatment systems. There's lots of treatment studies here, randomized trials of doing this and that. But I can only point to two people in Australia who've been seriously doing work on how agencies fit together or don't fit together, what happens to someone as they go through the system. Is relatively little on treatment systems in Australia, and we really need that to be focused on.
So we're missing that evidence base of, is it around treatment or is it around, I'm trying to understand, there's a lack of research around the treatment that works? Is that what you're getting at?
No, I'm not getting at that. I'm getting at the fact that, someone who comes in, a family who comes in where someone has a really strong alcohol problem, will have, there'll be some physical health problems. There'll be problems around, that they're threatened, welfare problems of one sort or another. There'll be a lack of money, so they'll be going off to Centrelink or something like that, and then there may be mental health problems also. No one knows much about how those things interact with each other, or under what circumstances they pass people on from one to the other. How much do they know about each other? That's what I mean by system stuff. Right. That, in other words, stuff that's looking at how this fits together or doesn't fit together for the case that's coming along, essentially. Because usually when you look at treatment research, it's around, I've got this wonderful cognitive behavioral therapy and I'm proving that it works, or I've got this pill, or I've got something. But not around how does it fit together, And, in the real world out there, people with alcohol and drug problems, it's often not confined to that one person, and it's often, multiple problems.
Yeah.